Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Froe Show. My name is Frank Mankin and I'm joined, as always, by my beautiful co-host, Joe Murray.
Hello, Froe.
This is the second time that we're recording the intro because apparently I'm incompetent.
Brain doesn't work.
Brain does not work.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you think of our lighting today?
It's out there.
It's out there.
It is different, and it is out there.
It was, I think we initially started with wanting it to be Smurf blue.
Yeah.
I'm from the alternate universe where Smurfs are green.
Ultimate
That's
Smurfiverse.
Smurfiverse. That's the SCU.
Yeah, okay.
The Smurf Cinematic Universe.
Smurnomatic?
The Smurnomatic...
No.
Smurnomatic unit. Smurnomatic... doesn't matter.
No, it is just Smurf Cinematic Universe. But
shortened it would be Smurnomatic Universe. We don't have a guest this week, so welcome back to the Froe Show from like July last year, where it's just Joe and I talking about things. We did have a guest lined up, and it was going to be a lovely episode, but unfortunately they had to drop out 2 days ago, which is 2 weeks ago when this episode comes out. But we had the decision between either not doing an episode this week, because we're currently a week ahead, not doing an episode this week and being back on like a regular schedule, or doing a 30-minute like casual filler episode where it's just us talking. So I said to Joe, we're going to film an episode anyway. We're going to do it. It'll be like old times, and we'll fill 30 minutes, and we'll do great.
Yeah, cool.
So
Let's fill 30 minutes and do great.
This is that. I think it could be fun to talk a little bit about like how the podcast has changed over the past. On a side note, before we get into that, I'm really excited for this episode because I have to do net zero editing.
Yeah,
I get to sync the audio to the video, cut the start, cut the end, upload, and I'm done. That's it. It'll be great. I'm so excited.
That'll be good.
I want to talk about how the podcast has changed since we've started having guests on, and you know, so much has happened because of that, and we've become much better interviewers because of that. So I think that could be fun to talk about. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, if we're just looking at how far it's come since we've got guests on, that's been the last 6 months or so. Yeah,
I'll check when the first like proper one was. Right. Yeah. While you're talking.
So our first guest episode, let's say this year, I think it was with Zach, and it was good. It was a bit all over the place. Like we weren't 100% sure on like our interviewing skills, what questions to ask, which questions to sort of that would dig a bit deeper.
It wasn't Zach.
Oh, who was it? Who was that first one?
It's kind of strange. So in January, 24th of January, we had Julian on. And then we had Sam the week after, and then we did a couple solo episodes, and then we had Personal Strangers, then Zach and Ian, and then it was a live show, and then from then forward we did only
wow.
We did 2 filler episodes where it's just us as well recently. We totally lied. I forgot that we did 2 fillers while I was in the Netherlands.
Yeah, do they count though?
I mean,
we were expecting them. True,
yeah. We had some time to plan those out.
Yeah.
This one is not planned out. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Okay, well, the first one being Julian.
So that was January, and then from the first one that we did where we just kept doing guests after that was the 28th of February.
Yeah. Well, Julian, I think, is a bit of an outlier. He was very good at talking, I remember, in that episode.
Yeah.
And so that was a good one anyway, despite being the first of this run of guests. And then, what was the next one? Personal Strangers?
Personal Strangers.
That one was probably one of the ones, looking back, where, we still weren't 100% sure what angles we were going to go down, where exactly we wanted to, like, poke at to get specific answers and, like, what answers we were looking for. But that's probably how it's changed most in my head, is now we kind of know what answers we want before we go into a show, and then or like we'll have a rough idea of their background and their profession, and then we kind of like, this is answer that we'd like to get or kind of explore a bit more, and then you can ask questions around that. So I think we just missed that in the
We started with
stages.
open-ended questions, and now we very much do leading questions.
Mm.
So rather than being like, what was your childhood like? It's like, people have said that your childhood has made your art really take a very punk style. Would you agree with that sentiment? It's very much like we kind of implant the idea in their head first, which is an interviewee style.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily good or bad. It just sometimes we're looking for a specific answer, and then we let them go from there.
Or you can take the other approach, which has happened once or twice, where it like turns into a bit of a therapy session.
Yeah.
And you say like, would you say that your childhood has affected your art?
Yeah. And you make it like
it's
really open-ended for them.
And sometimes you can see their face go, oh yeah.
Actually, yes.
Yes. That's good.
There are a couple like that. I think the two biggest ones that felt like that for me were the ones with Over It Man and Germ. I think both of those, we got to that point where we were like, would you say that childhood made emotion make art? And then they go, oh. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we've just sort of asked it ever since.
Yeah.
If you listen hard enough, you can hear that we're dancing around that.
Yeah. So there's been a couple of things that we've consistently started asking people in every episode, and I'll name a big one for me, and then you name a big one for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna try not to choose the one that I think you're gonna choose. So the big one for me that I try to come back to is how they create specifically, like not necessarily like how do you physically create, but what is your mental process around creation. So like we did an episode with Aisling Frankie a little while ago, and we talked a lot about how do you actually make music, like not necessarily like, oh, I go into FL Studios Lite and I make a beat and then I like, not that, but more like, do you have a ritual around it? Do you meditate for 30 minutes and then like all that sort of thing? So that's kind of where I try to go in terms of interviewing now. Yeah.
We found that trying to find specific examples was a bit like boring, dry. It was just kind of, there wasn't much substance to it.
The group of people that interests is much smaller. Like if you have a producer on the show, obviously other producers are going to be really interested in the intricacies of how they EQ a song or whatever. I don't know how they skidoink the sample.
Yeah.
But most people don't care. Like I would tune out.
Yeah. Yeah. A big one for me, I've got two. One is if the person has studied, studied outside of school, I like to ask why they decided to go that way, or if they saw any value in that, because some of the big things that you are kind of hear as a creative, as young creative, is that, you don't need to study. Like you haven't studied and you're doing great. Well, yeah. Well.
Financial, career-wise, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Creatives financially are not doing well. What were you saying
before about therapy sessions? Is this free or is this...
I'm prodding.
Can I bulk bill this?
No. So, yeah, I always ask, what value they saw in that, and if there's any interesting things around that. And then the other one is collaboration. Yeah. So I'll always ask something.
Oh, you didn't even bring up the one that I thought you were going to bring up.
Oh, what do you what did you think?
No, you talk about collaboration a bit more.
Yeah, collaboration is always super interesting, and it's interesting to find everyone's view on it, because I think that there's nothing better than it, and you can't get the same work from an individual that you can from two. Like, I think it's almost always better with more people. So, not more people, but with at least another mind on the project. So I like to see what other people think, and if they have any cool examples of where it's gone so much better when they've had someone else there. And often you hear, particularly with that, with Bria and I've forgotten his name, but her producer, James?
Deja Vu.
Yeah.
James, yeah.
particularly with them, they were like saying how great it was since they started working together properly on this, on that song that they were releasing, which, yeah.
Radio.
That's right. I was going to say Stocker, but that's...
Which the Spotify release is coming out this week, I think. Or
really?
It will be out by the time this podcast is out.
So go listen to that.
The one that I thought you were going to bring up, which I want you to talk about, because this one was your idea to talk about more, was how people's childhood impacts their art. Was
it my idea?
Yeah.
Well,
because I remember I brought it up initially in
it was up there.
Gabe's in Numpty's episode. Who miss you, Gabe?
Yeah.
But yeah, I brought it up in that one, and then afterwards you were like, "That's really interesting. We should talk about that more."
Yeah. Well, I think that question in particular is an easy way to get just a lot more personal and to start going down that path. So you go from you talk about them and their work a little bit, and then you can start talking about their background more. And when you ask, and often if you talk to someone just about their background, they'll go back to like when they started being a professional artist. So, when I graduated uni or finished high school, or when I did my first gallery for painters or whatever, specifically. But then if you start asking them about their childhood, it just opens a whole new world of like, I can talk about my parents on this thing now. And then I feel like once someone opens up about something like that, it's a lot easier to keep going and keep digging and getting more personal. And then with that, you get less of the stuff that they've thought about coming onto the show, and more just raw things. So yeah, I definitely see value in asking that to just about everyone if we don't get there anyway. Which is a good example for that question would be the one we had with the comedian. I'm terrible with names.
Kieran McLeod.
No.
Daniel Holt.
Daniel, that's it. So I'm so bad with names.
I have them all in my head.
The one we had with Daniel where
I care about you.
What?
No,
Me?
I care about them.
Oh, yeah.
I care about the people
I
that
do
have been on the
too.
show.
I just am bad with names. Like, I'm also bad with... Sorry, very quick tangent. If someone has an artist name and then a real name, there's almost no way I'm going to remember...
One of those two.
I'll possibly remember one, but there's no way I'm going to remember the other. So it's either your real name or your artist name.
There's a couple people that I know quite well now that I don't know their actual name.
Yeah. Yeah. So, episode with Daniel. We talked a little bit about his childhood earlier in the show, but we sort of kept coming back to it because we felt that there was more. And then eventually we got to a point where he told us a story about his brother, and that was the kind of the big moment of the show where it was like, whoa, okay. So
Yeah.
I definitely think, in summary, I think that question just gets things a whole lot more personal and you get more raw content. So.
Yeah. That feeds nicely into what I wanted to talk about next was I think that both of us now, after doing this for a little bit, have kind of come up with our own formulas for how to conduct interviews. And it's interesting because we've done them all together, but I feel like our formulas are really different, which I really enjoy, and it makes the show super interesting because it varies it, because it's like in one episode the first 10 minutes will be my formula and then the next 10 will be your formula. It's really cool. I really like how that comes together. But like one of the big ones, like I think it'd be fun to share our formulas for how we think about like an episode.
An episode in its entirety?
Yeah.
Okay.
In broad terms, like I don't need you to be like, at 30 seconds in, I'm going to ask them about their mother's cousin's left side's brother.
And then I'm going to put my left leg down and my right leg up.
Actually, while you're thinking about that, because I have mine in my head already, but as a quick aside, something I want to out us really quickly.
Oh no. What is this?
Because I know that this episode's going to get less listens than most of the other ones.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
So, for those of you who are here, you'll notice this now forever. Joe and I have a system within the episodes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where we were noticing in the early episodes when we had guests on the show that we would constantly be trying to get a question in, and we would both speak at the same time. We were like, that's like, we can't do that. So we came up with this system where if one of us, if we're done talking, like if we ask a question and we're done talking, we'll just put the mic on our laps.
And then the other person will start talking.
If you're still doing a line of questioning and you want to continue the line of questioning, you just keep the mic where it is. And you just rest it like under your chin.
Yep.
Or something like that. And it has worked near flawlessly.
Yeah. It is fun sometimes. You'll see us going up and down because it's like I'll start a line of questioning, then they go on a bit of a tangent, so I'll put my mic down now, and then they sort of bring it back. It's like, oh no, I can keep going. And then they go off again. It's like, oh, never mind.
Yeah, and you just go back and forth and back and forth. Yep. And then there's been a couple times where like Joe will put his mic down, and I'll bring mine up, and they'll go, actually no, I'll put mine down, and he'll put it. It's just like this little dance that we do. It's really funny, and it's like just subtle enough that you can't really tell. Yeah. Because it just looks like we're like fiddling with our mics. But that system has worked stupidly well for us.
I don't know if you've noticed this too, but like if one of us has a question, or like if a question's come from what our guest is saying and we pull the mic up to our mouth, they'll start to wrap up. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's cool.
Yeah. So you get a little bit of psychology.
Gives us a little more power.
Yeah, it's like the talking stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I talk now.
My turn. Okay, so this is my formula for how I format an interview.
Yep.
This is assuming that I have an hour, right? The first 5 minutes is just introduction. So covering their bios, covering who they are, trying to get a little bit of their personality in there. And then the next 10 minutes are split between two things. It's relationship building, because a lot of the time either Joe hasn't met them yet, or I haven't seen them in a very long time, or we've never met before. So that 10 minutes is purely dedicated to relationship building and getting them comfortable. So that's getting them to tell a stupid story, or us, or having a moment like one we did with that worked really well was again the Aisling Frankie episode, where we this. It was quite a bit later in that episode because we went on a big tangent, but we ended up talking about cool runnings for a little bit.
Yeah.
Completely unrelated, but it breaks that wall down a little bit, and then they feel more comfortable to talk more. And then from that point, once I can tell that they feel comfortable, I start asking more general questions about their career and their art and things like that. And then it gets slowly deeper as we go towards the end. And then towards the end, depending on I kind of gauge how they feel, because sometimes they'll feel they're quite worn out, or they're quite tired and they're kind of over it. Or you can tell that they're still good for more, they could keep going. And if they're good and they still feel like they can keep going, I'll ask harder and harder questions until we start wrapping up.
Yeah.
So that's when I start getting into things you mentioned that your dad made you sad when you were a kid. How did that impact your art? And do you one of the ones that we asked over at Man, right at the end, that was quite hard for him, that was a fun episode too, because but on a side note, Zach over at Man, he takes really long pauses. He's incredibly intelligent, but it's because he thinks through everything that he says. So you'll ask him a question and he'll just go, for 30 seconds.
Yeah, internal processing.
Yeah, and then he'll go. So that episode is there was literally 10 minutes of dead silence that I cut out of that episode.
Wow.
Anyway, so for his episode, that question that I asked, the really hard one, was about whether or not he feels that his art was good enough to go into a gallery. So that's kind of an example of that. And then towards the end, I start wrapping it up with a bit more lighthearted stuff, and then we have our generic end questions that we ask. That's my formula, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Well, we have kind of similar because we've been interviewing together for so long. But yeah, the beginning, the first 10 minutes is less relationship building between us three or four, and more just getting to know them and making sure that the listener knows what they do, or even me, I know what they're doing, where they've come from, what they've done, so all the bio stuff, and then you might ask a few more questions to work out what they're working on, and that's probably 10-15 minutes, and then from there, we get into the deeper stuff, I don't know. Trying to asking questions about their childhood. That's probably about the 30-minute mark. And same thing, if they start repeating themselves, we'll try and pull that back out and go down a different line. Sometimes what I've found helpful is if they're starting to repeat themselves a bit and looking a bit worn out, we kind of let them go on a tangent or let the conversation get casual again before I bring it back. And yeah, sometimes that happens with like you might start a casual conversation or something happens. And then, yeah, I'm like, okay, now it's time. Let's try and bring it back. Let's try and get back into this, in this 20-minute segment. Let's try and get back into the real deep stuff. And then at about 40 minutes, I see that as like you kind of have one more chance, one more question to reveal this big reveal, the big like climax of the episode. But then at 45 minutes, that's wrap up. So from there, I don't see any point in asking any more deep stuff because we're just about to wrap up. So yeah, that's probably my rough formula to that. And then even if I'm going down a particular line of questioning, I love to start with lots of context. So I'll often ask a question that's like very broad and then just get narrower and narrower. So, yeah.
Something that I really like that we've gotten, it was hard at the start, but that we've gotten a lot more comfortable doing is just not talking. Like just asking a question and just letting them feel the dead air.
Yeah.
Which we really weren't that comfortable doing to start with. We constantly felt like we had to be asking questions and interacting and engaging with them. But we didn't even consciously talk about it. There was just a point where we were like, all right, we can shut up now and let them talk.
Yeah. And there has been a couple of episodes where we've probably asked like 8 questions the entire show.
Oh yeah. Bria's was a really good one for that.
Yeah.
Like there's been a couple of people we've had on where you put in a penny and you get a pound. Like it's great. Like those are my favorite interviews.
Yeah.
Because I get to listen to a podcast on our podcast. Like, yeah, I don't know. And those are always the really cool ones because then I can gauge it while we're doing it. So I can kind of sit back and be like, is this interesting enough? Is this engaging enough? And then change that depending on, where we're at. Yeah.
Or do we keep going? Are they repeating themselves? There's lots of different things that go through your head when they're talking.
Yeah. There's been a couple times where I've been thinking so hard about what's going to happen next and where we're at and things like that that I have forgotten to listen. And then I go, oh, shit. Oh, shit. 'Cause I don't know what to say. I don't know what to ask next. That's usually when I go, let's go back to what you were saying before.
Right, okay. I'm going to listen for that now.
Yeah.
Whenever you say, let's go back, I'll be like, he wasn't listening.
That's usually because I've been trying to formulate a really good question in my head. And then I'm like, well, I got nothing else. This is all I got. Sorry. Yeah.
Do you find that when someone's talking, particularly earlier in the show, you might have like a little bank of questions in your head that have sort of come up and then you got to filter through and pick the best one?
Yeah, 100%.
This will do.
What was the one? Oh, there was an episode a little while ago where we were like 30 minutes in and I was like, I have nothing else. I am done.
Yeah. That happens every now and then.
Yeah. It's happened in 2 episodes. It was the one we did last week, which will be out by the time this is up, but isn't out for us yet.
Oh yeah.
The one we did with Minette.
Yeah.
About 30 minutes into that, I was like, that was all my questions. That's all I got. And I was like, let's talk about Jurassic World for 5 minutes while I figure out what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah. Sometimes that is the good thing about having a co-host though. Sometimes is that you can put it on a tangent and then be like, hopefully they have something to pull back.
Literally,
because I got nothing.
Let's talk about something completely unrelated, and then fingers crossed Joe has an idea. Yeah, and I wouldn't do that if I hadn't been doing a show with you for like over 2 years now, because I can gauge to a certain extent, like when you're comfortable with something and when you have an idea and when you have a good question, like a follow-up question. If it was someone new, I would not do that. That would be so mean.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to give up your line of questioning too to let the other person ask a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. You go, no, I trust that your question is better than mine.
Yeah.
And most of the time it is.
I've definitely had that a couple of times where I'm like, my follow-up question is shit. I'm going to stop talking now and just hope that you have been thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Fun.
But it's... that was a hang on, Zach moment. Okay.
Just going to think about what we're going to say next.
You were thinking about what you were going to say next?
No.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't know. I think we've learnt a lot so far from interviewing people. And it's been really interesting. It's one of those things that you can't... It's hard because you can research interviewing. You can learn about how to interview people and you can look it up and you can like learn as much as you want, but you're not going to learn unless you do it. And it's hard because it's scary to interview people.
Yep.
I remember that first episode we did with Gabe. I was shitting myself.
Yeah.
Because I was like, what if we don't do a good job? Like we've never properly interviewed anyone like this before. We'd had people on as like guests, but we never interviewed them, if that makes sense. Like we had Micah on a while ago and we asked them questions, but it was less about like interviewing them and more just having them on the show.
Yeah, well, we were painting at the same time.
Yeah.
It was very chill. Yeah, I don't know.
It's been fun though. I really, really like interviewing people. And I think it was like a very natural step for the show to take. And we've learnt so much doing it.
Yeah. I think also when you if you research how to interview, there's plenty of stuff on what questions to ask this type of creative, like what questions to ask a musician. But then they're often very generic or they don't fit your demographic. Like we often will interview young creatives, and so there's a very different approach you have to take to that.
We can't be like, what has been your biggest career achievement in the past 20 years? It's like, dog, they've been active for 4.
Yeah. And what was your biggest mistake? It's like, well, I haven't really made one yet. I'm like,
yeah, I dropped a canvas once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's been a really interesting thing for us to navigate as well, I think, is how to go about interviewing people that are still quite early in their career.
Yeah.
Which is it's interesting. It's really interesting in a very different way than it is to interview someone that's very experienced. I don't know. I think when we started, we came into it being like, we'll ask all these big questions about art and life and blah, blah, blah. But then a couple interviews in, we were like, we need to gauge our questions based on their experience.
Yeah. I think that was because of who our first guest was, Maddie, being... Well, just having a large following. I think we just thought, she'd be doing it for ages, which we found out she hadn't either during the show. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap it up. That was a fun little recap of the last 6 months.
Recap and how to interview.
Yeah. That was all we could have sold that. We could have made a course and we could have sold that.
Yeah.
But we didn't because we're good people.
You can interview.
And you can interview too.
If we can do it.
Anyone can. So, Joe, we have a tradition on the podcast where when we have a guest...
Yeah? What? I'm stressed now. There's a tradition. I have to do something?
I'm going to wrap it up. Do you have anything else you want to say?
No.
Wow. That's a surprise.
Yeah, what would you expect?
I don't know. I thought you were going to pop something out.
What should I do? What should I say then? What do you expect me to say when you ask that question at the end of the show?
I don't know. I guess I think that you'd have something that you haven't said yet, or like a closing remark.
No.
Okay. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of The Froe Show. We had a great time. Check out all our other episodes with all our other guests, and we will see you next week. Also, rate us on Spotify and stuff. Bye.
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 Yeah.